In the 2002 visual novel Suigetsu, there is one, or rather two characters that gain notable popularity online. One of them is Kotonomiya Yuki, who was deemed the ideal maid, stealing the heart of many, awakening them to the charm of a maid, and in certain places people got a bit weirder with the character. But before I talk about any of that, who exactly is her? Kotonomiya Yuki is the personal maid of the protagonist Seno Toya. She properly does all chores in the house, she cooks him delicious foods, while knowing his tastes perfectly, she wakes him up in the morning amongst the many other things. But Toya is not rich, nor she is employed by him. They know each other from very young. When she came to live with him, she decided to become his maid by her own accord and is proud of it. With a name meaning snow and white hair, she has an appearance akin to a snow hare, a mountain hare, always carrying a kind smile on her face. A beauty with a gentle demeanor, it sounds too good to be true. She would always put Toya in first place, being infatuated by him and love to serve. For example, the game is set in the countryside in the middle of summer, and she acts as Toya's personal cooler by fanning him. When Toya tries to switch places with her, she says, "Please don't take away Yuki's fun." She also becomes sad when Toya asks her to call him Toya-san instead of Toya-sama. She also adores pampering Toya. However, she is not only servile. If the opportunity appears, she will become self-indulgent, like when she gets sick and makes Toya pat her head and kiss her on the forehead. Her pajamas are also incredible, by the way. One time she forgets to take the cap off when waking Toya up. She is prone to feeling lonely, wishing Toya to give her attention if he neglects her a bit too much. And of course, as a cherry on top, she is horny, although she tries to hide it from Toya at first. A girl like her just sounds too good to be true. It sounds like a dream. Suigetsu is a game that plays around the blur between dreams and reality, with a bunch of folklore mixed in as well. So things might get a bit complicated, and it doesn't help that Toya has amnesia due to an accident he suffered with his father, who ended up in a coma. When we talk about Yuki, we have to talk about the rabbit balloons. Yuki says these balloons are filled with the dreams of children. Adults don't have those dreams, but they have the magical power to help these balloons reach the moon, where it will make mochi. Yuki takes one of these balloons to a girl who let it go, but instead of giving it to her, they both let this one go as well, cheering for it that it gets to the moon. And through coincidence, miracle, or magic, it joins the other one and they head together towards the moon. Another big plot point in the game is that Toya got spirited away when he was a kid and ended up in a village in the middle of the mountain, where he met a woman who acted as his mother for a night. His real mother had passed before he started understanding the world around him, and he heavily yearned for motherly love. When it was time to part ways, she gave him a stone and told him as long as he wished for it, someone who would be kind to him and pat him in the head would appear. This village was never found by others, and it was claimed to have been Mayo-iga, a lost house inside the mountain that only chosen people can arrive at. After Toya is discharged from the hospital, he returns to his usual life with his friends, and they would help him with his studies while awaiting for his recovery. Problem starts arising when his childhood friend, Karin, takes him to the archery club to prepare for a match. And when he tries to pull the bow, he breaks into a cold sweat and is unable to shoot the arrow. Throughout the game, Toya is having nightmares where he shoots an arrow at a girl, killing her. A girl that looks exactly like his classmate, Nanami, who is also seeing these dreams. Things start escalating when Toya kept refusing to go to the club to spend time with Yuki. Archery was the reason why Toya, Karin, and his other childhood friend, Shoichi, were able to become really good friends in the first place, and was what connected them. Another of his friends also left town due to personal circumstances as well. Things were crumbling down. It all culminates when Karin confronts Toya, telling him this is not the Toya she knows and wants that Toya back, making Yuki lose her cool for the only time in the game as she slaps Karin across the face, telling her that if the Toya she knows is not here, then she should leave. Toya is distressed over not being able to answer other people's expectations, but Yuki comforts him. She fully accepts Toya the way he is, even if his current self is not the old Toya that would try his best to please others. Yuki will be by Toya's side no matter what. But then, she started disappearing. Toya even forgets about her, but the next time he wakes up, she's back. But he becomes afraid that she'll disappear again. Matter of fact, on every route of the game, besides one, Yuki will eventually disappear and everyone will act as if she never existed. One of the heroines even get mad at him for living by himself but not being able to do chores. Things start becoming more vague. Sometimes Yuki will be there, sometimes not. Sometimes he would awaken on the hospital bed, sometimes awaken by cutting in a road where they never fought. To get sidetracked a little, in one of the routes of the game, Toya meets a girl called Maria, who is playing with her mother. Maria has a sister called Arisu, and their personalities are rather opposite. Maria is gentle and delicate, Arisu is belligerent and has a short fuse. They're also self-proclaimed witches who would be able to use magic through the stones in their rings. It's revealed that their mother has actually passed away a while ago, and Maria rejected that fact, wishing for her to be there and getting pampered by her. Later, upon having to face death right in front of her, in the form of a fox she befriended and some of her mother's remains, she becomes unable to see her mother as well. Arisu as well could see her mother, but being told she had to protect Maria, she matured much faster, and no matter how hard she tried, she wouldn't get petted by her. Toya was only able to see her mother because he was in a state where he had no past. He had lost his memories, so he was in a state closer to a child that doesn't know much. A child who can dream, who can have his wishes come true, and children like that are prone to be possessed and even spirited away sometimes. What exactly is Kotonomiya Yuki? On the personal cooler scene, you might have thought, is she not feeling hot, dressed like that in summer and fanning him? And the answer is no. Yuki's hands are always cold. Her body lacks pigment. She has red eyes. She excels at smarts and physical ability, as well as being higher than the average woman. She is afraid of the sea, although not afraid of rivers. She does go to the sea by the request of Toya. Her body rejects common medicine. She gets allergic reactions from it. She likes the strong grassy smell of the mountain. She gets very horny and is extremely devoted to Toya. Kotonomiya Yuki is what's known as a Yamabito. In the game they're called mountain people. One day, Yuki and Toya go into the mountain to an unattended open field. It is where her parents are buried, although they have no graves. State Shinto was the government-enforced religious system in Imperial Japan, established in 1882 and ending with the end of World War II. It made use of Shinto traditions and folklore to portray the emperor as a divine being by emphasizing that the imperial family were descendants of the sun goddess Amaterasu, who was made the ruler of Japan after its creation. However, folklorist Yanagata Kunio would bring up the theory that mountain people were the indigenous people to the land. That would imply Amaterasu was not the pioneer of the country, lowering the emperor's lineage from deities to invaders. So in Suigetsu, in the middle of the war, the local mythology was modified and documents regarding mountain people were destroyed. A school with an air raid shelter was built just before the war, despite this being a very peaceful town, and closed right after the war ended. On the route of the Gypsy twins, when entering this bunker, the twins sensed death. They sensed that many people died inside that bunker. The mountain people were designated as unacceptable to exist and were the target of ethnic cleansing by the Imperial Japanese government. And even after the war, some mountain people will fall in the hands of researchers, and it's implied Yuki's parents died in such way, although she herself doesn't know about it. Also a researcher, Toya's father was trying to protect Yuki from others and told Toya that if something ever happened to him, then Toya should protect her. It is heavily implied that the accident Toya and his father suffered was plotted. Writings on mountain people also equated them to creatures like Oni or Tengu, and they would kidnap many people into the mountains and cause many to be spirited away. Toya's father also said that Yuki had possessed Toya. Yuki had great interest in Toya since they were kids in more than just wholesome ways. She wasn't allowed to go to school and was not good with crowds. Her fear of the sea is likely due to when her ancestors were invaded by those who came from the sea in a ship bigger than anything they ever saw. Toya and Yuki go into the mountain for a hike, and Yuki unconsciously takes him to the destroyed village where he got spirited away when a little kid. There they find a cave, they have visions and decide to go back. Later, the town festival is happening and Toya decides to go. Karin fails her performance, and when returning home, Yuki once again disappears. The same day repeats itself and he decides to stay with Yuki this time, pretty much ruining his friendships. But the next time he wakes up, all his friendships are okay. He can even pull the bow, everything returned to normal. A normal where Yuki doesn't exist, and it's not even clear if she ever did. He and Karin would end up seeing a kid who let go of a rabbit balloon, and Karin says this had happened before when they were little. She let go of a rabbit balloon. Toya's mother told her the rabbit balloon lives in the moon and they have to go there to make mochi and they should cheer on it. She takes Toya's balloon and lets it float towards the sky as well. Karin was captivated by it and stopped crying, but Toya wouldn't, because to him the balloon was his friend, a friend he had given the name of Yuki. It's here that the endings start happening. If instead of staying with Yuki, Toya decides to go to the festival to warn Karin about her performance, Yuki disappears and Toya decides to sleep on her room. However, he calls it his mother's room. Another ending is when Toya dreams of the balloon when he and Karin were kids and he holds it, floating along with it. If he grabs Karin's hand, they'll become lovers and Toya will wonder if Yuki was able to reach the moon as he sees a balloon floating towards the sky. If Toya decides to keep holding the balloon, he will still wake up without Yuki and will start becoming emaciated for he only desires to be with her. He decides to look for Mayoiga and meets his friends at the entrance of his house, and this is the last time you have to make a choice. They plead Toya to stay since he is haggard and at the verge of throwing away his friends for someone who they and even him don't know if she exists. And if she does exist, then he'll disappear from their lives just like she did to him. If he chooses to stay, he'll end up with Karin and they will both see a rabbit balloon outside and show it they're both happy. If he does choose to go, Karin is heartbroken and Shoichi just tells him that if he doesn't end up finding Yuki, he should come back and they can overcome all this together. Him for losing Yuki and them for being rejected over this illusion. So he goes into the mountain and after wishing with the stone, he finds the village, goes into the cave and ends up finding Mayoiga, the place closest to the moon, and he asks Yuki to come back to him. He falls asleep to awaken resting his head on Yuki's lap in a world covered in snowdrop flowers, a world for just the two of them. It is revealed that when they were kids, Toya told Yuki that it would be better if she just disappeared. That was just after his mother told him that life is connected and she would die for the sake of a new life. The one who appeared just after was Yuki, and Toya thought she became the replacement of his mother. Due to being a mountain person, thus someone deemed unacceptable to exist, and being rejected by Toya, her existence since then became vague, and she would always wonder why she would be there. How long should she stay, if she was even needed? Throughout the game, she's one of the two characters who call themselves by their own name, as if trying to put emphasis on their own existence. As a mountain person, Yuki also says that at one point she started understanding she was something from another world. Whether that is true or not, whether Yuki is real or not, and how much did she exist matters not to Toya, who can't stop crying while Yuki pats him in the head for he found his mate again. And just like a child dreams of becoming an astronaut, along the magic power of that stone, Seno Toya, who threw everything he had away, arrived at the moon for the sake of Kotonomiya Yuki, who truly had no one besides him. And from here, they would spend the rest of their lives together as Seno Toya the master, Seno Yuki the maid, and eventually Seno Shizuku, their child. So, I don't know how much sense that made, since I tried to give a quick course of one route of a whole visual novel that heavily relies in mythology which I'm not very acquainted with at all. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, Yuki is my wife. She got several lovely figures made of her and had a doujin event dedicated to her and Suigetsu called Yuki no Shizuku, which lasted 4 iterations. Now, it's sweet that Toya managed to find Yuki again and they ended up together, but what if I present this interpretation? Throw away your friends and family for the sake of your imaginary waifu. Refuse to grow and cling to your internal fantasy world. Even in the game, Yuki equates the rabbit balloons to Peter Pan and the moon as Neverland, being a fake world created by him to which he clings to. And depending on how real do you think Mayoiga and Yuki were, the protagonist did pretty much that, which leads to not such a wonderful reading of the story. However, this reading does fit one place wonderfully. A place where virgin men children gather. We're finally here. Futaba Channel is an image board that is very similar to 4chan, because 4chan was built on the same source code as Futaba Channel. As a matter of fact, 4chan's first board, the random board B, was based on the most popular boards of back then and of today in Futaba Channel, Nijiura, a place where any sort of discussion goes. Also, I'll be calling her Yuki-san from here on, since it's how posters in Nijiura would call her. Yuki-san also stole the heart of posters in Nijiura. At the beginning of its life, posters would create threads featuring many different characters, which would be adopted into the board culture. Eventually, they would decide on what's called the Magnificent 10 of Nijiura, a reference to the Magnificent 10 from Giant Robo. The first 10 big memes in Nijiura, and Yuki-san was amongst them, being called Hakuchu no Yuki-san, Yuki-san the midday. Some posters even only knew of Suigetsu because of Yuki-san and the other Magnificent 10 of Nijiura. Waha! In Nijiura, she's very similar to how she was in the game. She was very kind and accepting, and would serve the posters of the board, who at the time were called Toshiaki. But she also received the setting that she was the strongest maid in history, an expert in firearms who fights for their sake. She also started being called Dame Ningen Seizoki, useless human manufacturer, due to the fact that she would accept, pamper, and take care of the users no matter what, making them more and more dependent on Yuki-san and want to be pampered more and more, just like she did with Toya in Suigetsu. A very common saying towards Yuki-san was whenever she appeared, posters would comment, Yuki-san nyang nyang, Yuki-san nyang nyang, Yuki-san nyang nyang. They would also talk about piss, calling her a piss maid and making jokes about piss. And the reason for that is because in Suigetsu, on one of her ecchi scenes, she just lets it out. And Toya is looking at that and going, wait, no. This is awesome, this is amazing! And while Yuki-san is serving the lemonade, he starts sipping the holy water. As a matter of fact, literally every heroine in Suigetsu released themselves in the act, and Toya awoke something inside him every time. Because of that, Suigetsu, that's written with water and moon, sometimes is lovingly called by fans Nyogetsu, written with piss and moon. She's also called a lewd maid, because she is, but more notable are the pillow jokes, because she has rodeos with Toya's pillow when he's not looking. Another reply that was almost sure to appear anytime Yuki-san was posted was, Yuki-san is my wife, which would be replied with Okujo Maeba. Okujo means rooftop, Maeba means front teeth. Okujo is a reference to Salaryman Kintaro, a manga where a former gang leader becomes a salaryman as a promise to his late wife. And in this particular scene, he's attacked in the company and retaliates by slamming a chair in the guy's head, proclaiming he hasn't been this pissed in a while and calling him to go to the rooftop to fight. Maeba is a reference to Neon Genesis Evangelion, the manga, where Kaoru badmouths Rei after her sacrifice and Shinji grabs him by the collar, daring him to repeat himself while claiming he's going to knock his front teeth out, which became notable for being unexpected of him. So if someone claims Yuki-san to be their wife, someone else is going to get pissed and call him up to the rooftop to knock his front teeth out, and at the end, they would come to a mutual understanding as only people who exchange fists would know. However, she was so contested that lines to the rooftop started forming, even after the rooftop was expanded to fit more people, and posters are still awaiting their turn to get there. Many posters would also wonder how to go to Mayoiga to meet with Yuki-san. Mayoiga was equated to Gandhara, an utopia where posters in Nijiura would be able to spend the rest of their lives married to a 2D character and with them. A setting mostly based on the song Gandhara by Godaigo. If you go there, any sort of dream can be fulfilled, a faraway country that anyone wishes to go. She would frequently ask posters to go to sleep and have customary threads wishing them a good night in her pajamas, sometimes with guests. Posters would set up mousetraps with pictures of Yuki-san, and despite of it being the oldest trick in the book, people always fell for it. Sometimes the traps would go a bit more overboard. Due to being tall, she would be portrayed as a giant once in a while. At one point, Nijiura had a maid boom, starting with Midoi-san, the maid that finds things bothersome to do. And due to that, the setting of a maid academy was open, and of course, Yuki-san became the headmaster of the place. She goes around looking for suitable students. However, since she's so accepting and lenient, she enrolls all sorts of people, beings, and things, while wholeheartedly believing everyone to be good kids. Lots of them end up being no good maids, and lots of them were fated to go into the place called Maid Cemetery, where forgotten maids go to. Also, due to being a lewd maid, her teachings can be a bit twisted, however she means no harm. Besides, some masters will be happy with that. Despite being very kind, she can also be scary sometimes. For example, if people make too much noise, she'll cut their Achilles heel and throw them into a bamboo thicket afterwards. And ultimately, she seems to have a wife? It seems to be a gorilla? I don't know why. My source of information only says, for some reason, her wife is a gorilla. Anyways, Yuki-san is a very loved maid, a very loved mother, a very loved wife, a very loved lover, just a very loved character in general. If you watched other videos talking about Nijiura, you're probably acquainted with the fact that they create lots of characters, the Nijiura maids and the OS girls for example, and the same happened with Yuki-san. Several derivative characters were thought of and developed from her. Some didn't see much, if any use, but others had considerable presence in Nijiura alongside the original Yuki-san. Lots of different types of nyang-nyang, so I would like to talk about them, starting with this one. She is also called Yuki-san, but instead of using the kanji for snow, it is written with the kanji of to go, to pass away, to die. However, the name can also be read as Iki-san, so for the sake of convenience, I'll be calling her Iki-san. So Iki-san is the insane version of Yuki-san, who was born as the materialization of Yuki-san's feelings towards Toshiakis, the posters of the board. Her speech is insane. She goes on frequent laughter fits, saying ahahahahahahaha and kiss 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 kiss. She shares passionate kisses with the Toshiakis to the point it seemed they would die of asphyxiation. Her main physical characteristic are her long thin limbs, and she's also rather athletic due to being a mountain person. She would chase the Toshiakis in drunken frenzies and sometimes holding weapons as well. Despite feeling like a stalker character, sometimes her earnest love gained the heart of many Toshiakis, who would gladly accept her kisses while they still existed. We have to talk about Toshiakis. Toshiaki was the default name of Nijiura posters at the time. However, due to a sense of unity created from this identity, they started causing trouble, culminating when they inflated Nitro Plus's character popularity poll, making Tono Koji from Sayano win, all commenting under the name Toshiaki. The administrator of the website received a complaint from Nitro Plus, and so, in July 15, 2004, the name Toshiaki was removed from Nijiura and replaced with nothing. Just emptiness. At first, characters would be unable to recognize the posters, whose new identity would be portrayed as empty square brackets. But eventually, they would get used to it. Yuki-san, despite not recognizing the posters at first, would later keep calling them Toshiaki-san, one of the few characters that would still do so. And whenever someone posted Yuki-san calling posters as just square brackets, others would point out how weird it was. However, for Iki-san, the Toshiakis she knew and loved fully disappeared, and she was never able to understand where they ended up at, even asking the posters who lost their names where her loved Toshiaki went to. Later, the Nijiura board, Mei, would be open, and their default name is Toshiaki. However, the Toshiakis on that board were not the Toshiakis she knew. She went to the Mei board, the Nov board, the June board, even outside the website, but none of those places had the Toshiakis she knew and loved. So ultimately she came back to the IMG board, one of the two boards created from the split of the original Nijiura. There, she started serving the square brackets while awaiting for the day where her original master Toshiaki would come back. She would react to threads created where the image used was the name Toshiaki. She also wouldn't believe posters who would try to tell her they were Toshiaki. She wouldn't understand the fact they were the same person or take it as a cruel joke. The name Toshiaki would come back a few times, but very fleetingly, so she would just end up confused. Also apparently, browsing Nijiura on mobile would show users as Toshiaki at the time as well. When the administrator of the website would put up an announcement, she could be seen asking her to bring the Toshiakis back. She would also be featured on a series of stories where together with the square brackets who she served, they talked about her trying to overcome her trauma, and sometimes they would even have some sweet stories where people would say how annoying it was to look at, but in a good way. These series of stories lasted a really long time. She is also one of the teachers in the Maid Academy and is also one of the characters to use something similar to a crowbar as a weapon. Despite her character and appearance, she did have a fair share of posters who like her very much. Whenever a character of good appears, it is not unlikely that someone will make a dark version of it, and that is how the character Dark Yuki came to be. However, the name Yami Yuki-san was later adopted by the community. Her look is originally based on a drawing by the game's artist Gayaro, where there is a sketch of Yuki-san looking rather pissed. At first, Yami Yuki-san was a quite serious character and rather sadistic, heavily looking down on the posters in Nijiura to the joy of a certain kind of group. She was elegant and composed, but on the opposite way to Yuki-san, and could be described as a cool beauty. In contrast to Yuki-san being proficient with firearms, Yami Yuki-san is proficient in the use of blades, but she mainly makes use of her whip, which is a creature called Neko-naria. Neko being cat and Naria for planaria. It's a creature in Nijiura that was born when someone posted a picture of a planaria which looked like a cat, and someone known as Kiniko-sensei put a face on it, and it became a creature that accompanies some of the Mayoiga Nijiura maids. Apparently, Yuki-san has very powerful Neko-narias, but besides this drawing, I haven't seen more of it. Yami Yuki-san originally used to live in the same house as the other Yukis and had a romantic interest in Iki-san. However, she disappeared from Nijiura for a while, and when coming back, she started living with square brackets and her little sister. She was still strict and dignified, but with a hidden cuter side, a tsundere at times. One of her biggest traits is that she has charisma breaks in the form of being incredibly afraid of thunder and earthquakes, to the point she starts crying sometimes. And as time went by, she became less and less dignified. Posters would sometimes still call her Dark Yuki or just Dark as a way to mock her past of being an edgy character, and that calling herself Dark in English was lame. She works at the Maid Academy, and due to Yuki-san being fully accepting and open-minded, which leads to her inviting all sorts of maids, she acts as a more serious and strict, realistic you could say, counterpart, who can't really do anything about it, so she has her hands full, dealing with all the school's bizarre students. But she is still considered a good teacher who is liked by them. Due to being too busy with her work at the Maid Academy, the square brackets who she lives with started doing the housework themselves, and things eventually developed into a husband-wife kind of scenario, where she makes the dough and the square brackets became the stay-at-home husbands. At one point even, the quote-unquote husbands were put into maid uniforms and they became motherly themselves. And as time went, she started losing her coolness more and more and more and more. There was also a group of people called Yami Yuki-san, which means the squad to cover Yami Yuki-san in, and the group would come up with plans on how to achieve that against a woman like Yami Yuki-san who has such a high guard. Some examples of plans would be, let's fill a bunch of balloons with and then throw them at her. Let's kidnap her sister, then when she comes to help her, we cover her in from above. Let's make her delicious cooking every day, and after 5 to 10 years, she'll become content and have gained weight, so she wouldn't be able to dodge well. Let's become God and flood the entirety of Mayoiga itself with I don't think they ever succeeded. Also, due to Yami Yuki-san being what you could call a strong woman, she is also one of the characters who are believed to be weak in the ass. Later on, Yami Yuki-san started being portrayed as someone who really enjoys drinking beer, more specifically, Yebisu beer. Imagine a husband who gets back home from work and cracks open a cold one kind of deal. She likes it so much that when she heard a store had them on sale, she grabbed some money from an envelope the square brackets of the house had saved in secret, stole the bike of the Nijiura maid Rai-san, the delinquent maid sister of Medoi-san. After buying her beer, she finds a clothing catalog inside that envelope, and then she realizes he was saving it to buy her a gift. Some posters pleaded her to go back to how she usually was in the past, but she stayed as something similar to a no-good husband. Because of that, although she was seemingly a good teacher, posters were wondering if she was ever a proper maid at all. Despite all this, she and the square brackets she lived with were frequently portrayed as a very lovey-dovey couple. Some would even go their way to call the mix of the carefree square bracket with the serious yet maiden tsundere Yami Yuki-san a bakapuru, a stupid couple. Also, Oda Nobunaga would have frequent delusions regarding Yami Yuki-san, and so she kept her days not flirting with her not husband as they lived together with her little sister. Chibi Yami-chan. Very early on, after the birth of Yami Yuki-san, she was being drawn as a chibi moe character, and eventually this portrayal became its own character. She always had her eyes half open and acting seemingly disinterested. Didn't used to speak much and was a bit precocious, but was also rather timid and a bit of a scaredy cat. There weren't really any jokes or materials connected to her, so she didn't have that much presence. She was mainly part of the group of friends of another Nijiura character, Waha! But by the end of 2003, Nijiura was suffering a lot of trolling, and I do believe the servers were unstable as well, so the character started traveling, even creating a setting called Chisana Tabibito Chibi Yami, Little Traveler Chibi Yami. She would eventually arrive and gain popularity outside of Nijiura, outside of Futaba Channel even, in what's called bunke, branch houses, which is a term used to describe image boards similar to Futaba, created from its influence. For example, one of them being Plus Nijiura Plus, which would create their own OS-TON characters. One of my sources even called 4chan one of those websites. And regarding Chibi Yami-chan herself, she would become popular in sites like Nijiurara and the place she likely had more activity at the time, the site called Toshiaki et Shiokara. where a big amount of Chibi Yami-chan illustrations would appear, to the point she started being seen as a character from a branch house rather than a Nijiura character. She would eventually attempt to come back to Nijiura, but a handful of posters would post that Shiokara characters should go to Shiokara, which later became a staple reply whenever she appeared and was already accepted back as a Nijiura character. After returning to Nijiura, she would be living with her sister and the square brackets, where she would become jealous of her and start trying to compete with her for their attention. She would eventually befriend the Nijiura maid Kiri-san, who is based on the mythical creature Kirin. She is a little bit more timid and seemingly pure on the outside, but still precocious as well. They would bond over them having a crush towards the square brackets they live with, and together they would support each other's endeavors in seducing them. Although apparently Kiri-san got a head start compared to Chibi Yami-chan, and they would go to school together every day. Chibi Yami-chan started becoming a more expressive character and a much more assertive character than what she used to be. In other words, the Roricons rather liked her, and ultimately, she only became what the users of Nijiura wanted her to become. She started being called a ko-akuma, which means a little devil, but also a term that's used for a young seductress. And even her actions started being seen as traps by the posters of Nijiura. She also likes to wear C-strings, which I didn't know was a thing, and I don't think I can show any art of it, but it looks like this. I drew it myself. Later, she and Kiri-san would form an idol duo called Chibi Kirin under the talent agency known as KBM Planning, run by the Nijiura maid Koryu-san, based on the Yellow Dragon, who is a sort of mother to Kiri-san. And KBM Planning, which is not a name created to sound like a company that makes AV, they make all sorts of wholesome videos where nothing suspicious happen in them, and in the case of Chibi Kirin, videos that wouldn't need to get the police or some higher organization involved. Later, her group of friends would expand with the addition of the Roricon hater Beako, and the group would be called Nuko Nuko Dan. Beako would feel troubled that her two good friends are Roricon manufacturers, unbeknown to the fact that she herself is one as well. And a bit later, the Russian sniper Furan Sujin would also join their elementary schooler group. Because Chibi Yami-chan was used by the site's administrator at one point, some users would joke she had some sort of connection to her. Chibi Yami-chan can also use magic, conjuring all sorts of spells with her staff. For example, magic that makes the whole day have good weather, or magic that forces One-chan to have a smile on her face for a whole day, or magic that makes One-chan not being able to hold it in anymore, or magic that makes One-chan not piss herself when thunder comes. Yeah, the brat does a lot of stuff on a whim, a lot of times treating her older sister like a toy. Chibi Yami-chan also likes whales, but not the animal you and me know as whale. She likes a creature called Kujira, which means whale in Japanese. Kujiras are an endangered species in Nijiura and were born from someone posting a picture while tracing what they thought to be a ghost. And because it looked like a human with a whale head running, it was called Kujira. Although the final form became just its head, with small limbs growing out of it. It became less and less seen in Nijiura. However, it saw decent activity in Toshiaki at Shiokara, which explains their friendship, and when they appear together, she could be seen riding it. Another whale she likes is the creature known as Kujiramome, a mix of Kujira, whale, and Kamome, seagull. Kujiramome is the biggest flying creature born in Nijiura, created in a think of a character in 1 minute challenge. It's a friendly, rather intelligent animal that causes no trouble despite its size, and Chibi Yami-chan is a big fan of it. Chibi Yami-chan appeared on TV, I think twice, although I'm not exactly sure what the context is. She was used as packaging for dorayaki. One day as well, someone drew what's called a kantan version, aka a simple version of Chibi Yami-chan and Kiri-san that just barely maintained their features. and it became popular enough that other characters started gaining this version as well. Reactions of posters ranged from not being sure how to react or to writing down simple words in English. Now, you might have noticed that Chibi Yami-chan also has a nekonaria of her own. Because this nekonaria was always portrayed appearing behind her, posters theorized that it came out of her ass. But something more interesting happened with the nekonaria after a while. One day someone made a drawing inverting the roles of Chibi Yami-chan and her nekonaria, giving birth to Naria-chan, or Nekonaria-chan. I'm not sure what her exact name is. They would have the ability to change places with each other, such as when Chibi Yami-chan would be in trouble, or when Naria-chan would offer to help to seduce the square brackets. But then she wouldn't return and just take them for herself. She also speaks in a Kansai accent, and sometimes they don't have to switch places, they can both exist at the same time if people feel like it. And so Chibi Yami-chan would spend her peaceful days living in the square brackets house with her older sister and trying to get with her Oni-chans, who in turn would call her their sister-in-law. Now, before I talk about the next Yuki-san derivative character, I have to talk about a whole different character from a whole different visual novel, Kusarihime Euthanasia. That game, although very different to Suigetsu, it still has some similarities to it, such as it being set in the countryside and the protagonist having memory loss. But what matters here is the character known as Ise Kiriko. Kiriko is the lover of the protagonist who keeps telling him that if he stays on that place, he would become no good. He shouldn't try to get his memories back just for the sake of others, and it is no problem to live simply looking towards the future. When you take that speech and put it in Nijiura terms, it can be interpreted as, if you stay here in Nijiura, where unemployed virgins gather, you will become no good. So the solution to leave, it's to find a job. So Kiriko became a character that tries to drag posters into Hello Work, which is the Japanese government's employment service center. The posters will be portrayed by a popular self-portrait in Nijiura called Ore, meaning me. She uses all sorts of methods to achieve her objectives, from using dangerous weapons to cosplaying and impersonating other characters, while trying to hand the posters job application forms. She also became established as a stalking character in Nijiura, which kind of fit her actions in Kusarihime, because the moment she hears the protagonist went to his hometown, she took an overnight trip from Tokyo to get there. Numerous collages of her will be created, which became very popular with editing beginners and experts alike. And about 2,000 pictures were created about 2 years after she started gaining traction in Nijiura. Eventually, the theory that the character Kiriko was simply the glasses on the girl's face was brought up, leading to putting the glasses on another character being enough for it to successfully take over them, as if it was a parasite. The original body as well would act nice and not attempt to drag the posters into Hello Work without the glasses. It was also theorized that she only enjoyed taking unemployed people to Hello Work, and if they got employed, she would get them unemployed again so she could keep doing it. For a while too, she was accompanied by Didrito from Record of Frodo's War, who in Nijiura would be called D-sama or the Peeling Elf, because her character in Nijiura was one that loved to peel foreskin and would appear whenever the topic was brought up in a thread. The reason this happened is because someone made a joke about it on a thread on making characters say things they would never say, and the joke stuck. When finding a character or a poster that still had it, she would become overcome with joy and would peel it. She would also get very mad at anyone trying to put it back in place. And because of the idea that virgins of Nijiura would likely still have her skin, she was well seen with the character Ore, and eventually she would join Kiriko hunting them. Okay, that was a little bit of a divergency. What does Kiriko have to do with Yuki-san? It's because she had the exact opposite mentality to Yuki-san, who accepted the posters of Nijiura no matter how useless they were, thus leading them fighting. which ended in a large-scale three-way fight in Nijiura. Three-way fight because for some reason Midoi-san, the maid who finds things to be bothersome, was dragged into it as well, due to her approach standing right in the middle of the two. It is uncertain who won the conflict, but posters decided one day to fuse Yuki-san and Kiriko together, then separate them, and what came out of it were two new characters, Kiri-san and Yuko. First, let's talk about Kiri-san. She's the older sister, and being a mix of Yuki-san and Kiriko, she was initially a very capable maid and kind to the posters, but also confident and tried to get them to Hello Work. She is also a Hello Work character. She would host a very long-running series of threads called the Beautiful Sister Threads. At first, it was posted in two different boards, although it would be done as a singular one later. Every morning she would prepare breakfast for the posters as well for miscellaneous Nijiura characters whenever we would be celebrating their birthdays, some random holiday or celebratory day, sometimes just making parodies of stuff, and sometimes just making some random reference to something. It was just an all-around nice thread to have in the morning. You don't need much reason to celebrate. Besides her sister, she was also accompanied by a white tiger who she tamed herself. She can be very scary. Her character did grow to have that side, due to her yellow eyes coming from Kiriko, making her seem like she has snake eyes, and becoming someone who you shouldn't anger and unforgiving towards anyone who dares to hurt her little sister. Becoming even stronger than Yuki-san in the case Yuko could be facing danger. Kiri-san is extremely doting on Yuko, as you could tell. Perhaps a step beyond doting. She's an extreme siscon. She even makes doujin products, featuring Yuko, from doujinshi to games to models. She was a character overflowing with mature appeal, which was wonderful for the posters who had adult woman fetish, and it wasn't unlike for her to be portrayed with other Nijiura characters who filled similar boxes. But for those who didn't had adult woman fetish or just didn't mind joking about it, she was constantly called Baba, something like a granny, which would of course call the ire of Kiri-san to whoever say that. But actually she's apparently 17 years old. 17 years old and 144 months. A 17-year-old that watched Urusei Yatsura when it was releasing on TV. Eternally 17 years old. She could be 51, but she is most definitely 17. There were periods of time where she would try to lure Chibi Yami-chan for the purpose of absorbing her youth. It did work once. She cosplayed a lot on those beautiful sister threads, and alongside her age jokes, one character she was frequently seen with was Windows 95, who also cosplayed and was also called a granny herself. And together, they were known as the furry pair, because when you add their ages together, it would be furry, and no other reason besides that. So of course, it is not unusual to post lewds in Nijiura, but due to situations where the servers crashed after Kiri-san lewds were posted, or when trying to save them on Shiokara's file uploader, which was used by Nijiura posters, they wouldn't be properly saved. So the rumors that Kiri-san lewds were cursed started making rounds. And whenever people would post a Kiri-san lewd, other posters would panic, saying the server would go down, as well as joking that Kiri-san had the ability to take down the servers at will. Despite that, she would have a good relationship with the Windows Server characters, observing them while they would play all sorts of different games and being shown to treat them with kindness as well. Of course, due to being a Yuki-san derivative, she also worked at the Maid Academy, being the vice principal. And unrelated to all that, sometimes a mysterious masked person would appear sporting a walking cane tonfa as a weapon, based on Kiriko's cane, for she had an impaired leg. Amongst the people this masked person would save was Kiri-san's younger sister. Yuko is the youngest of the Hello Work group. Most of the age from the fusion seemed to have gone to Kiri-san. She's a shy, innocent character who at first had a hard time getting her thoughts out with pauses in her speech, and her threads would always finish with "Desugimashita, gomen nasai." Sorry I was too pushy, sorry I was too aggressive. She is comparatively and surprisingly a rather normal character in a place like Nijiura where only weirdos gather. Doesn't seem to be aware of how much her sister loves her or how overprotective she is, but still likes her very much. She calls the white tiger Nuko-san, meaning cat or kitty, who she makes it play with the posters of the board, much to her dismay. And that plays along the fact that she's kinda slow in the head. She is dumber than a chihuahua. She also has little sense of danger. Because she is slow in the head, posters frequently called her a dameido, an useless maid. She was horrible at doing any sort of chore or housework, more specifically cooking. The sisters are also frequently accompanied by this frog named Koukyu Shokuzai, which means high-class ingredient, due to the theory of frogs being used in Chinese cooking, so she keeps trying to use it in her own. There also exists the theory that the frog was actually being frequently replaced by new ones as it was used in cooking, but it does seem to be the same one. It also has a younger sibling and sometimes it has to go hibernate, so a robot version of it would take its place. So because of her nature, she was a very bullyable character, but a handful of posters enjoyed her uselessness. It was cute. As you can see, Yuko is rather young, and she would also have a complex over the size of her chest. However, it was also surmised that she was at middle school range, which is why she started making friends with other Nijiura girls at the same age range. And her first girlfriend of the same age was the OS girl, or rather the OS boy, Homeo. And this is the start of a kind of interesting story arc. Yuko visited the OS house because Homeko, the Fujoshi OS girl, wanted to show Yuko her work to influence her into becoming a Fujoshi. Reaching the house, she is met with Homeo cross-dressing, and even though she heard Homeko had a younger brother, she didn't connect the dots and thought she had a younger sister as well. And this is how they started their friendship as girl and girl? Anyways, this is Eigo Seki. He is a Rosen Maiden derivative character based on the character Jisso Seki, who is based on Suisei Seki. He is an overworked salaryman who works on the company known as the Empire Commercial Affairs in Nijiura, and he is just kinda miserable. And Yuko fell for him. Maybe because she felt a sort of camaraderie in his failures, maybe because she just respected how hard he worked, despite those failures, and she eventually confessed to him. Eigo Seki, absolutely shocked to be confessed to, is happy that someone would do it but didn't accept at first, although he did want to learn more about her. Yuko didn't really understand what he was saying since he only speaks in desu, so after she studied the language, they start befriending each other. On a later day, they would go on a date, and it was a rather chaotic thread because half of the people in it were like, Eigo Seki is a lifetime virgin who loses himself due to finally having a girl in his life, so he takes her to a love hotel and deeply regrets what he did after the fact. He has to be miserable. But the other half was like, but enough of 2000 Nissan's delusions. I don't see Eigo Seki doing that. He takes her to an amusement park, and it was mostly due to being unable to just refuse her date proposal. It was like seeing the forces of good and evil clashing. Later threads followed the more wholesome route though, and they went together to another known Nijiura location, Bar Shimon Heart, where the owner of the bar, Daiginjo, suggests him to play the guitar, which is his big interest. Eventually Yuko as well starts singing along, and so the date ends well. The thing is, there was a group following their date this whole time. And along the way, Homeo as well joined them, and seeing this, he becomes filled with jealousy, so he gets a guitar himself and starts giving his all to become good at it, to become better than Eigo Seki. Homeo would eventually challenge Eigo Seki to a bout, but as expected, didn't really manage to surpass him, as well as Eigo Seki seeing through Homeo and feeling that something was wrong with his play due to his motivations. However, Eigo Seki too would be happy that he made a guitar companion, and so the two would bond over it and become friends as well. Now, a little before this happened, there was an incident where Homeo was sick and Yuko gave him medicine mouth to mouth, which was seen by Windows 98 Hachan, and filled with jealousy herself, she revealed to Kiri-san that Homeo-chan was Homeo-kun all along. Filled with rage, Kiri-san heads to meet Homeo, but when getting there, she finds an exhausted, passed out Homeo with his fingers split open due to practicing the guitar so much to impress Yuko. Faced with that, although not acknowledging their friendship, at the very least, she wouldn't rip his head off and shove it up his ass for now. And so Homeo and Yuko continued their relationship with Kiri-san keeping an eye on him and even enjoying the situation a little bit. Okay, that was a little long. The next character on Yuko's group of friends is called Shirley. Shirley is based on Shirley Madison, a young maid from the manga by Mori Kaoru called Shirley. In that manga, she is very capable at doing housework, but still shows signs of her immaturity. She is also not a very expressive person and doesn't speak much. She is rather modest. The exact opposite of how the Nijiura character Shirley conducts herself. Back when the posters were still called Toshiaki, they enjoyed the idea of a 13-year-old maid and introduced Shirley into Nijiura as a major rookie, and she confronted the #1 popular maid at the time, Yuki-san. But due to not having an established joke to herself, she had no way to compete. Later, she did get some material to her name, such as learning how to take print screens by placing monitors on a printing machine, and edits of the scene in the manga where she gets mad at her mistress's aunt, which is the only time she gets mad in that manga. That panel started getting many and many edits, where she starts saying the most heinous and inappropriate stuff, to the point her mistress prohibits her from using Nijiura. And because of these edits, she became a sharp-tongued brat who abuses people verbally. And in a little bit of a deviation, she also has a big crush on Inogashira Goro from the manga The Solitary Gourmet. And the reason for that is because in chapter 12 of The Solitary Gourmet, Goro visits a restaurant where the store owner spends the whole time lambasting his employee, who is a foreigner. Losing his appetite, Goro confronts the store owner about the atmosphere of the restaurant, and the owner gets physical, which leads Goro to put him in an arm lock. And this scene became quite popular, just in the internet in general. In Nijiura, that scene became the basis to many collages, and a lot of them ending up featuring Shirley, who most of the times would end up with her in an arm lock. She would become infatuated with Goro, and she would even start following him around, becoming his stalker. Even some Nico Nico videos showcasing some of the edits and their story, called Goro and Shirley, they have hundreds of thousands of views each. So due to Shirley being one of the earliest Nijiura maids, even before the whole Ise maid boom happened, and being the first maid character by Mori Kaoru, aka the goddess of maids, she was also called Bancho, a term that describes the leader of a group of juvenile delinquents. And she would bully newcomer maids. And of course, Yuko would be one of them. Shirley had a joke attributed to her where she would scream, "When I said I wanted a cola drink, I meant Pepsi!" So when Yuko brought her Coke, she would tell her to go get Pepsi. When Yuko brought her Pepsi, she would say she's in the mood for a Guarana drink. When Yuko brought one, she would say it's the wrong brand, and so on. Kiri-san would sometimes bring the correct thing, but eventually she would get pissed at Shirley, which led her to stop it. Edits where Shirley said Yuko was hers appeared, which ultimately led her to be portrayed as friendly to her, although still having her acidic personality. Others that would be included in the group of friends were other middle schooler Nijiura maids, and which ones they were would kinda depend on the course of events in Nijiura. Sometimes Hidoi-san, the maid who has horrible things happening to her, and sometimes Fanshi-san, who is a delusional yandere maid. But the ones that became more established would be Tai-san, the Chunibyo maid, and later on, Tensai-san, the genius but actually mediocre maid. And this is pretty much the middle school group. And I think that's all there is to be said about the Hello Work trio. The next Yuki-san derivative has its origins all the way back to when they first started coming out. Two characters were created, Kuro-san, Kuro meaning black, a blonde and brown skin version of Yuki-san, and Kaminari-san, Kaminari meaning lightning, a blonde Yuki-san in black clothing. Many years later, it was decided that they were both the same person, so the brown-skinned blonde Kaminari-san emerged from it. By the way, apparently her name can be read as Kaminari-san or Rai-san. Both readings are correct for the kanji. I'll call her Rai-san. Rai-san is always energetic and in a good mood. She also has the ability to produce electricity and conjure lightning out of herself. She is accompanied by a nekonaria called Kaminaria, which is clearly based on Mr. Pokemon itself. She speaks in broken speech, which is portrayed by her mixing in katakana characters and random English words. And that is because the whole time between her creation and her reintroduction to Nijiura, she was overseas, most likely in Hawaii. Because she left before the purge of Toshiakis, she didn't know what had happened and almost brought back Iki-san's trauma as well. In the end, she kept calling posters Toshi. She doesn't seem to know how to read their current names, I don't know as well. She is childhood friends with Yami Yuki-san and is likely the reason why she's so scared of thunder. And just like Toshi, she calls Yami Yuki-san dark, much to her dismay. Also calls Chibi Yami-chan Little Dark. Of course, upon returning, she also became a teacher in the Maid Academy, which helped since despite some previous graduates also being teachers, the place still felt like they had too little staff in general. At one point, someone thought, wouldn't it be fine if Rai-san had a younger sibling and so Chibi Rai-san or Little Thunder was born? Just like Rai-san, she is a real bright kid who always has a smile on her face. She has very high energy, but just like a kid, suddenly runs out of battery and immediately falls asleep afterwards. Just like Yami Yuki-san with Rai-san, Chibi Yami-chan is not very good with her, being something akin to an opposite and being jealous of how straightforward Chibi Rai-san is with the square brackets. And this is her countdown form. There are still many derivative Yuki-sans, although many didn't get much attention, with different hairstyles, Mecha Yuki-sans, Yuki-san fused with other Nijiura characters. This one's a cabbage. This is Kyabe Yuki-san, and this one is a cabbage, wearing Yuki-san's pajama nightcap. It used to be treated as emergency food, but then it managed to get an instructor suit of the Maid Academy and became a teacher, mostly in charge of ingredient-type maids and alike. She offers cabbage dishes made from herself to raise the immunity of the posters, and her nekonaria is called abunaria, abura meaning fat. Amongst all maids, she's the only one that can help you prevent heartburn, since cabbage helps you dealing with increased stomach acid released with higher fat intake. It is unconfirmed, but it was likely born from when Kecha-O was popular, a reference to a legendary CG of Ever 17. This one's a cabbage. So the amount of no-good maids in Nijiura was increasing at an alarming rate, including those harmful to their masters. Posters started saying, there's no way Yuki-san will raise maids that would hurt their masters. So as a counterpart to the Maid Academy, called Megaku, the school Shimegaku was thought of. Shimegaku is located right in the middle of the maid cemetery. They don't teach cooking or cleaning. Matter of fact, their students are told they would be sent directly to the maid cemetery after graduation. The school's objective is to exploit and squeeze every possible penny out of the square brackets. The headmaster is Kumo-san, written with the kanji of cloud, but Kumo also means spider, so she has a spider decoration as well. Her defining trait is that she always tries to say something that sounds cool. She's also a scammer. And apparently, if you claim Kumo-san to be your wife, you're taken to an underground arena. Yami Kumo-san is a teacher in Shimegaku, and her body is covered in scars from dealing with her problematic students, some of which don't even understand human language. Kiri-san, a name that stands for kill, is their version of Kiri-san. She went insane and became a hag witch because of the low employment rate from Shimegaku graduates, alongside their savagery. She might just be Kiri-san herself. Den-san, Den standing for electricity, is an android and there's not much more to say about her. They also employ a male teacher called Instructor Hoiderun, based on SNK's Haidern. He's a teacher who teaches the students how to use, or rather, abuse Futaba's Dell system, which is the report system in the website. Some of the maids that came from Shimegaku that I saw were Shiharai-san, Shiharai meaning payment, the loan shark maid who acts fine committing all sorts of heinous crimes, and runs a service called Megaku Caching Service, tagline with, "We want to support your Nijiura addiction." Although she does seem to take a liking to people, for example her masters, who would still be in the known of her actions. The following four, who are designed around posting in Nijiura, the internet vandalism A-team. Sensai-san, sensai meaning sensitivity, who reacts against easy eroticism material in Nijiura and would go on fits of anger shooting her gun around. Mortal enemy of the womanizer Mebo, also her master is Sensui from Yu Yu Hakusho. Shosai-san, shosai meaning details. She asks for more details while crying like all sorts of animals, and they're so realistic that people can see her as the animal she's imitating the cry of. Usually she cries like a pig. Kyusai-san, Kyusai meaning salvation. She was part of the Zero Reply Thread Salvation Committee, which was a way posters would identify themselves to save threads with no replies from dying. The closer to death the thread was saved, the better the job was. These two are Naruto characters, by the way. Jay-senpai and his kohai, whose scene where they go, wait just a second, what is it? Became a source of lots of collages in Nijiura Naruto threads. They were very excited when they appeared in the anime too. Kyusai-san would take her job very seriously, but after they added a function to sort threads by least replied, most of the committee disappeared. Soui-san, Soui meaning consensus, the maid who claims to hold the general opinion of Nijiura and aim to trample the minority. She would be filled with rage when faced with any sort of opposition in her threads and would frequently be rage baited by other posters. She would even ignore the requests of her master for the sake of fighting people online, until she would get banned from the website, and only then she would calm down and do proper maid work. Also, just my personal opinion, she's really cute. When Kumo-san heard about the success of KBM's blonde junior idol group called Kitere, composed of Kiri-san, based on the Chinese mythological creature Kirin, but Tensai-san, little prodigy who as time passes realizes she's just a normal person, and Lemon Tea-san, which is the maid that serves lemon tea. The same type that Yuki-san does. Shimegaku concocted their own idol group to oppose them, called Kebabu, composed of Kerubi-san, based on the Monster Hunter mob Kelby, one of the weakest in the game. But Bakusai-san, Bakusai meaning gambling, and she's a gambling addict maid. And Buradi-san, who instead of serving fresh lemon tea, she serves fresh tomato juice. And lastly, there are suspicions that Utagai-san, the maid who doesn't trust anything, is suspected to be a student from Shimegaku. She was born from a color variation of a previous Nijiura maid, Shinrai-san, the maid that trusts anything. She frequently carries a knife with her, who she has used to stab many posters, people, and her masters with. Because she doesn't trust anything, she does her best to be self-sufficient, harvesting all of her food. She also loves fishing because of that. She also sold self-made t-shirts that says I heart Umi, Umi meaning sea, and apparently she made good money from it. Posters would also have several nicknames for her, such as Uta-an and Utamaru. She denies being a graduate from Shimegaku though, until it becomes convenient for her, then she'll say she's from there. Well, it's a free-flowing board. There's no canon, only loosely accepted truths. So another theory is that Utagai-san used to be a boy and was turned into a girl to become a maid by Yuki-san, so she could enroll in the maid academy. I suddenly deviated a lot from talking about the Yuki-san derivative characters, but honestly I don't think there's anything to say about another one of them. However, I would like to talk about two other characters somewhat related to Yuki-san. This is a creature known as Sanrio, a realistic drawing of Hello Kitty used as a 100 yen shop billboard, which gained popularity after a picture of it was printed in the magazine VOW, Voice of Wonderland, Volume 13 in 2001. This character was introduced in Nijiura and was so jealous of Yuki-san's popularity that it started morphing into her, becoming a sort of joke to make a GIF where it started with Yuki-san, but when users would open the GIF, it would morph into Sanrio. Just a nice little joke that I saw a few times during research. Kiriko, Shirley, and Sanrio were not the only oppositions Yuki-san faced in Nijiura. She had what you could call a personal enemy in the form of Shadow Moon, also known as Nobuhiko, character from Kamen Rider Black. The reason why he's her enemy is because a poster dreamed that Nobuhiko was fighting Yuki-san, and from that day on, Nobuhiko was considered the enemy of not only Yuki-san, but of all the Yuki-san derivative characters as well. The problem was that Yuki-san was one of the Magnificent 10 of Nijiura, meaning she was an extremely powerful character, so he was never able to win despite also being one of the candidates for the group called the Big Nine of Nijiura, also based on a group in Giant Robo. One of the candidates because there were more than 9 characters brought up and it was never decided exactly who the 9 would be. Nobuhiko would openly badmouth the Yuki-san family, and Yuki-san would also not be very kind towards him as well. He was also another character who was rather popular on Toshiaki at Shiokara. And I think I have to stop things around here, otherwise I'll be here forever. So what now? Suigetsu released in 2002, and Yuki-san got popularized in Nijiura in 2003. She was beloved for years and years and years, but how long did the joke last? After over 2 decades, it is not surprising that the popularity of this character would decline and even die down. But turns out that was not exactly the case. Perhaps declined, but not dead at all. Discussions on Yuki-san still pop up once in a while, and by this point, she's undoubtedly ingrained in the board's culture. There was an Iki-san thread this year even, in the same style as the ones from a decade ago and prior. And Chibi Yami-chan seemed to still be rather popular amongst a very specific crowd. Suigetsu as well got a re-release in 2023, it was the one I played. And FNC, the company behind Suigetsu, also started selling cosplay, with her first pick being Yuki-san's maid uniform in 2025. One day, people will forget about Yuki-san, and that rabbit balloon will return to the moon. Perhaps the people holding into it are all old guard who were there about 2 decades ago to experience the Yuki-san boom firsthand and are just barely hanging into it. But even so, that still means people remember Yuki-san dearly. There are still people trying to claim her to be their waivas, and there are still people knocking their front teeth out. And there will still be a few more front teeth that are going to fall from that rooftop. I think that is all I have to say about Yuki-san. But I am still not finished with Suigetsu. There's one more character that did some waivas. However, that's going to be for a later video. I would like to give my thanks to Squadalo again, due to offering everything Nijiura related and being very patient with me as I kept appearing randomly to ask for more stuff. Thank you very much. And of course, I would like to give a big thanks to everyone who's supporting me on Patreon. Sorry for the delay. Thank you Dark Rose. Thank you Aldope. Thank you Resseis. Thank you Vederepi. Thank you Salty Taro. Thank you Uzo Buzo. Thank you Nephrite Dragonfruit. Thank you Alari. Thank you Octavian Mihai. Thank you MeowMix64. Thank you Claudia Kaplan. Thank you Sauce. Thank you Gangsan. Thank you Hobby Anon. Thank you Sat. Thank you Lime Phoenix. Thank you Titan. Thank you Voar. Thank you A. Thank you Aochi. Thank you Ultra Cat Flap. Thank you Weissahel. Thank you Gyulai's Here. Thank you Rocky. And thank you Victoria Vela. If I mispronounce your name, you are free to make a call-out post on twitter.com. I'm going to go to sleep now.